Do you know what's funny? A long time ago, when atheism was relevant, they used to have this particular argument that they would make all the time. They would say, if God was all-knowing, why did he come 2,000 years ago in the person of Jesus Christ? Why didn't he come today? I mean, today we have science, we've got video evidence. They could have filmed and gotten video proof of Jesus' resurrection. God should have been wiser and come in our modern era so that he can prove his resurrection like that, right? Well, funny, I think of a particular Jewish person right now who's allegedly dead, and yet there's all kinds of video evidence of him walking around, all kinds of people talking to him, interacting with him, accounting for him still being alive. And yet people are still completely convinced that's all fake, that he's actually really secretly dead. But no, instead, all this evidence that Netanyahu is still alive, it's all, oh no, it's AI, it's AI. And all the people who are witnessing him, like Mike Huckabee, like the coffee shop that he visited, they're accounting for it. Nothing, just all part of the psyop, apparently. Kind of like Jesus' disciples, his brothers, who ejected him during his life, by the way. And all these other people, like 500 all at one time, oh, they are also all part of the psyop. Never mind that they all committed themselves to being rejected by society, beaten, tortured,
fed to lions, crucified upside down, pierced by spears, boogie, 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 stoned. And I don't mean the devil's lettuce.
Nope, all just part of a psyop. So I guess video evidence isn't really the proof atheists thought it was after all, was it? There's definitely times in my life that I kind of come to wonder, what kind of evidence does it really take to convince somebody something is true? And to be frank, sometimes that answer is nothing. Nothing will ever convince them. No amount of evidence will ever convince somebody that they're wrong about something. When a person has decided in their heart that Netanyahu is dead, any amount of evidence will be AI and psyop. When somebody is completely convinced that Jesus never existed, no amount of historical evidence will convince them that he was a real historical person. Because at the end of the day, we're not really a truth-seeking species. We're a propaganda-seeking species. We're a looking to prove my opinion, looking to prove I'm right in everything I say. That's the kind of species we are. And it actually takes humility to say that I'm wrong about something. So, a whole lot of people, when they are objectively wrong, when they are provably wrong, no amount of evidence will ever convince them that they're wrong, because their pride is in the way. There are times that we are so stubborn in our pride that literally nothing will convince us that we're wrong about something. There's an interesting scene in the Bible, in Luke chapter 16, where this man in the afterlife asks Abraham to send somebody back from the dead to warn his 5 brothers about the resurrection. This is how the conversation goes. But Abraham said, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them." But he said, "No, Father Abraham, but if somebody goes to them from the dead, they will repent." But he said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded, even if somebody rises from the dead." Man, Jesus was definitely pulling a power play with that line there. Now, let's just be honest. All of us do have this tendency. All of us do seek to rationalize our disbelief in such and such a thing, or to accept our failed belief in such and such a thing. It is very hard for us to cognitively process that we are wrong on something, even when evidence overwhelms us. If we're honest, most of the time it is easier to live, even in cognitive dissonance, than to live in admitting that we're wrong about something. And this is something that we all do struggle with. Now, with atheism specifically, there are a couple of ironies with this whole thing. First and foremost is that they project themselves as this objective observer of truth, that they don't have a bias. No, they follow the evidence wherever it leads. And then they just handwave evidence left and right when it doesn't fit their agenda. Oh, but they follow the evidence because they don't have a bias. Yeah. Now, we all do have a bias on things, and that if you think that you don't have a bias on something, literally anything, then you're probably just deceiving yourself. I think we even have tendencies towards biases that we don't acknowledge, even of minute things. I'm not a sports fan, but I still have a little bit of biases for my home city's teams. I might pretend that I don't care what brand of car is, but there's a little bit of a nostalgia to any car that I've previously owned. And kind of a little bit of a pride that, yes, I've always made the right decision in my car purchases. And so when somebody talks bad about a car company of a car that I've owned, then just a little bit of my, well, wait a minute, I've had a... Zoom out. So anytime somebody talks negatively about a brand that I've owned in the past, there's a little bit of me that wants to say, hey, wait a minute, I've had a good experience with that. You're questioning my purchase decisions. See, just a little bit of bias. We've all got them, even in the areas that we don't think of. Atheists have convinced themselves that they can bolster their credibility by not having biases, but I think a more realistic to the human condition is to acknowledge our biases rather than pretend they don't exist. If you pretend something doesn't exist, then you're just turning a blind eye to something that is actually there and actually affecting you. That is actually living in more denial than allowing yourself to think, maybe I have a little bit of a bias in this area. But the second irony, and the irony that I'm really pulling from with this case of Netanyahu, is this challenge that video isn't as reliable as we tend to think it is. Perhaps you're not convinced that Netanyahu is still alive because you just saw a video of him. Perhaps you would be more convinced if you actually saw him in person. But wait, so actually seeing somebody in person is more credible than video evidence of them? So the disciples who saw Jesus in person rather than seeing video evidence of him resurrected. So God was right in sending Jesus when he did, in a time when people did rely more on actual physical experiences rather than what they saw on the internet. So this entire argument that God should have waited until our day where we could have recorded Jesus, it's actually bunk, because we can fake video in our day. Now somebody might push back and be like, well, God could have sent Jesus after the camera was invented and before AI was invented. And well, yeah, sure, that's true. Of course, obviously, just assuming history would have played at all similarly in the same direction where we would have developed camera without Jesus, without the rise of Christianity, that's, a big alternate history question. But let's just assume and grant that, yeah, history would have still panned out to where we would have gotten cameras where we could record this without Jesus, without the rise of Christianity. Let's assume that. And then, yeah, okay, Jesus comes after the camera was invented, before AI is invented. So...
Oh, geez, that's great. Is the lighting halfway decent?
Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface.
Up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface. Beautiful, just beautiful.
We did not exactly have modern AI and modern Hollywood when we landed on the moon. We've got video footage of that, and yet people still say that that was fake, that was made in a studio. So if you got people who can deny video evidence of the moon landing, video evidence of people who are supposedly dead, then wouldn't faking somebody's crucifixion and resurrection be really easy? Now, this also doesn't cover future generations who could come up with this idea that, well, yes, this video is claimed to be made before AI, but do we really know it was made before AI? I mean, that was 1,000 years ago. How do we really know the timeline was not just made up by later people embellishing it? Now, with books, we've got good ways of testing the age of the paper and the ink. I think what we haven't said is actually much more authentic. It wasn't an elite governmental psyop that created the Jesus conspiracy. It was a bunch of ragtag nobodies who are actually being persecuted by the government. And while video footage can be corrupted when the next format comes out, and you need a computer that is able to read the data, with books, you don't need that. You don't need to update the codes for modern formats, nor do you have to keep old computers with old formats to read a book. You don't even need a computer to read a book. All you have to do is just open the pages, and it's just there. Ink still shaped on there from hundreds, even thousands of years sometimes from before. Yeah, sure. Paper is pretty brittle, it's pretty easy to damage and destroy, but if it's taken good care of and in the right environment, it can actually very easily outlast video formats. And I would challenge you to ponder this question honestly. How many pictures, videos, audio files, or text files have you had saved on your computer for a couple decades that modern formats can't read? How many documents have you lost because modern computers just can't read that data? I know for me, I've lost a good few. Now, of course, the best way to preserve data, rather it be through texts in books or coding on a computer, the best way to preserve it is to constantly be copying it down, to pass it from one generation to the other. And computers do fortunately have programs that can convert documents from one file to another, thereby helping us preserve some of those special documents, such as the moon landing. But the truth is that data, whether it be computer data or textual data, data only survives so long as we protect it, so long as we continue to promote it. And that's why I'm happy that we've got communities who are continuing to preserve old special video footage, old special recordings, old special video games, because they're preserving parts of our history, part of our media and art. But so then preservation is not by locking something away for 2,000 years and waiting for our next generation to discover it. Preservation is about passing something from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And that is the model that the Bible inscribes for us to do. So I think God was pretty wise in how he gave us revelation of himself in the Bible, in Jewish history, in church history. But when push comes to shove and certain documents are lost, then maybe occasionally, every once in a while, there will be ancient preserved manuscripts hidden in some caves in some dry land that is preserved for thousands of years. But video data, it would not be able to survive that. But old physical texts, they seem to last a whole lot longer without human preservation. So yeah, I think God knew what he was doing and how he chose to reveal himself to us. Sometimes we get a habit of getting an idea in our head that sounds right to us, but it may not actually apply the way we think it does. So is there any reason to think that God would have been wiser to have sent Jesus in our time versus 2,000 years ago? Nope. Books last much longer than video, but the ultimate way of preservation is from one generation to the other, and that's the instructions he gave us. So I think God knew what he was doing. Thanks for watching, and God bless.
תודה. מה שאלת אותי?
ראש הממשלה אומרים ברשת שאתה בכלל מת?
אני מת על קפה, אתה יודע מה? אני מת על העם שלי.
פשוט הקמש מישהו מתו על העולם ישראל, וישוע מתו על כל העולם.